the three parties that are responsible for regulating, facilitating, constraining, blocking that assistance, Israel, Hamas, and Egypt, all have their peculiar and particular interests here.
So with this peace summit taking place, does beg the question, why isn't America at it? We can speak now to Aaron David Miller, former Middle East negotiator for the US and senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Good afternoon, Aaron.
Good morning to you, at least in Washington.
Yes, indeed. Good morning to you in Washington. Good afternoon from here in London.
Right.
Talk to me about America not being at this summit. What do you make of that?
What I make of it is that the summit is convened largely, in my judgment, given the fact that the two key actors that are driving this conflict right now, Israel and Hamas, are not obviously present, is more a reflection of key Arab states' political predicament. On one hand, several of them, two have full treaties of peace with Israel. The Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Moroccans have agreements to normalize. And they're caught, it seems to me, in a sort of dilemma. Their publics are angry, and their associations with the Israelis, perhaps by implication with the United States, means that they have to find some way to diffuse and deflect that anger. A summit in Cairo clearly is not going to do that. The rhetoric out of Cairo seems to be pretty robust in terms of double standard, which is the one theme that seems to be circulating more than any other. But as a practical matter, even while the summit convenes, there is a positive development today, finally, after days of negotiation and disputes at Rafah. Humanitarian assistance begin to flow into southern Gaza. I think the other key issue is that events are in control right now. And the international community, the United States, key Arab states, really don't have the capacity, and probably will not have the capacity, perhaps until the ground campaign begins, to significantly shape or influence the course of events. This is not hardly an exception when it comes to any number of Middle East confrontations over the course of the last 50 or 60 years. So it's a rather gloomy prognosis. Most breakthroughs in this conflict have occurred preceded by war, terror, violence, insurgency. 73 war produced 3 disengagement agreements and an Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. Saddam's invasion of Kuwait and the Bush 41 administrations to push him out led to the Madrid Peace Conference. First Intifada clearly led to a calculation on the part of both Israelis and Palestinians that there was no military solution to this conflict. It produced Oslo. I'm not predicting that will come of this particular conflict, and it may well spread. But right now, other than trying to shape the Israeli response by time, perhaps, in an effort to secure further releases of hostages, I think the role the United States is able and willing to play, if we're talking about restraining Israel, and I think that obviously is what's on everybody's mind, I think America's influence is going to be quite limited.
Just on the aid situation, you mentioned there that there is some good news, at least today, with the first of those aid trucks crossing the Rafah border. It's good news, of course, but it is really a drop in the ocean. 20 trucks when you have 1 million displaced people in Gaza seems pitiful. Is there any scope for an increased level of aid crossing that border in the coming days?
that's really a question, I think, again, and it's further underlining my point. The three parties that are responsible for regulating, facilitating, constraining, blocking that assistance, Israel, Hamas, and Egypt, all have their peculiar and particular interests here. And despite the presence of the UN Secretary General, understandably, emotionally articulating that this is not a line of trucks, it's a life and death line, life or death line. Again, it demonstrates the limitations. Why should any of us be surprised with the international community's limitation in curtailing and preventing confrontation and conflict? I mean, just identify one example where the international community interceded to somehow stop a state or a nation determined for any number of reasons to launch military operations. It was not true of the United States in Iraq and Afghanistan. Certainly has not been true in any of the Arab-Israeli wars. Certainly didn't affect Vladimir Putin's calculations. So, we have this sense that the world is somehow evolving to a better place where the vaunted international community can act with great cohesion, confidence, and power. And yet, in response to the most planet-altering event, arguably since the end of the Second World War, not with the exception, obviously, of climate, the international response to a virus was frankly pathetic. People retreated to their national corners, took care of their own business, and in fact, it increased polarization in the international community rather than sort of accelerated a degree of cooperation. So I'm sort of speechless when I hear these pronouncements. Or one other example, look at the issue of responsibility to protect, the intercession of nations to prevent genocide, okay? Since the Nazi Holocaust, to include the Nazi Holocaust, you've got Cambodia, Rwanda, Darfur, South Sudan, even Ukraine. So none of this surprises me. What surprises me is the insistence of pundits and with the best of intentions to somehow assume now this time it's going to be different. It's not going to be different because international intervention is proved to be the exception for decades and decades and decades. And it's a sorry, pathetic comment, frankly, but it's a reality.